As the investigation expanded, authorities began reconstructing Daniel Harlow's crimes in reverse, not from the moment of arrest, but from the first subtle signs no one had understood at the time. Each discovery added another layer of horror, not because of brutality alone, but because of how invisible it had all been. Daniel did not hunt impulsively. He selected victims the way a strategist selects terrain. He preferred people who were isolated, emotionally vulnerable, or overlooked by society. Some were lonely, some were struggling, some trusted easily. He learned to mirror emotions, to reflect empathy, to make people feel seen. Once trust was established, he slowly introduced fear, subtle, controlled, deliberate. He enjoyed prolonging that stage. Investigators uncovered evidence that in several cases, Daniel had followed his victims for weeks without acting. He wanted to understand how anticipation changed them, how uncertainty weakened them. In one recovered message, he wrote, "Fear is strongest when it has no shape." That sentence would later be read aloud in court, sending a visible chill through the room. The crimes themselves were efficient. No wasted movement, no emotional outbursts. Daniel treated violence as a task, not an expression. But what truly disturbed psychologists was what came after. He revisited locations, he followed media coverage, he observed how grief unfolded. He took mental notes. In one case, he attended a vigil for a victim he had killed. He stood among grieving families, head lowered, hands folded. No one recognized him. He blended perfectly into sorrow. At home, Margaret remembered that night clearly. Daniel had come home late, unusually quiet. When she asked where he had been, he told her the truth, just not the whole truth. "There was a vigil," he said. "It felt important to be there." She praised his compassion. That memory would later haunt her. As police analyzed Daniel's digital footprint, they discovered private archives, carefully hidden, encrypted, meticulously organized. Inside were timelines, victim profiles, emotional analyses. He had categorized people not by name, but by behavior: compliant, resistant, unstable. Human beings reduced to data. One section was titled simply, "Lessons." There was no hatred in those files, no anger, only refinement. The journalist reviewing these materials described Daniel not as a sadist, but something colder. A man who viewed cruelty as a form of intelligence. Violence was not an end. It was a proof of mastery. Margaret was shielded from most of this evidence. Investigators believed exposing her to the full extent of Daniel's actions would cause irreparable psychological damage. Even so, what she learned was enough to break her. She began to question every memory, every smile, every conversation, every moment she had defended him. She remembered defending Daniel when neighbors expressed concern. She remembered insisting he was kind, thoughtful, incapable of harm. In hindsight, she realized she had been his most effective shield, not because she was naive, but because she loved him. During an interview, the journalist asked her a single question: "When did you last feel safe with your son?" Margaret was silent for a long time. "I don't know," she finally said. "I don't know if I ever was." Daniel's trial became a case study in modern criminology. Experts debated whether he was born this way or shaped by opportunity. The conclusion was unsettling. Daniel did not emerge from chaos. He emerged from normalcy. He had structure, support, education, stability. He also had opportunity and no internal resistance to using it. When Daniel was given a chance to speak before sentencing, the courtroom expected remorse. There was none. Instead, he spoke calmly about perception. People think monsters look different. They think love protects them. It doesn't. It just makes you blind. Margaret lowered her head. Life imprisonment was handed down. Daniel accepted it without reaction. As officers led him away, he did not look back. Margaret never visited him. After the trial, she disappeared from public life. She moved to a small town under a different name. She avoided neighbors. She avoided attachment. Love, she had learned, could be dangerous. The journalist ends this story not with justice, but with a warning. Daniel Harlow was caught, but he was never obvious. He was never loud. He was never monstrous on the surface. He was a son, a neighbor, a familiar face. And that is what made him terrifying. Because the most dangerous evil is not the one we fear, but the one we invite into our homes, trust with our hearts, and love without question.
The hardest part of this story is not what Daniel Harlow did. It is how ordinary everything around him was. There were no warning sirens, no dramatic collapses, no moment when the world stopped and pointed a finger. Evil did not announce itself. It lived quietly. It ate dinner at the same table. It said goodnight and closed the door. For months after the trial, I kept returning to one question, not as a journalist, but as a human being. How does a mother survive the knowledge that the child she raised is responsible for such deliberate cruelty? Margaret Harlow did not raise a monster. She raised a son. And that distinction matters more than we want it to, because it forces us to confront a truth that is deeply uncomfortable. Love does not come with a warning system. Daniel did not grow up in violence. He was not beaten. He was not abandoned. He was not neglected. He grew up in safety. And yet, somewhere between affection and opportunity, something inside him formed, quietly, patiently, without ever revealing its shape. When I asked psychologists what terrified them most about this case, none of them mentioned the crimes themselves. They spoke about control, about restraint, about how carefully Daniel managed the version of himself he allowed the world to see. He did not lose control, he exercised it. And that is why this story matters. Because we are taught to recognize danger by chaos, by noise, by instability. But Daniel was stable, he was predictable, he was polite, he was trusted. Margaret trusted him, and that trust did not make her weak, it made her human. In the months following the sentencing, she stopped correcting people when they avoided her name. She understood why they did it. Some crimes stain not only the guilty, but everyone who loved them. She once told me something I haven't been able to forget. If I had hated him, she said, this would be easier. But hatred was never an option, because mothers do not stop being mothers when the truth becomes unbearable. They just learn how to carry it. Daniel will spend the rest of his life in a controlled environment, watched, measured, contained. Margaret will spend the rest of hers asking questions that have no answers. And perhaps that is the most painful imbalance of all. Society demands monsters. We want evil to be obvious, to look different, sound different, live somewhere else. But this case offers no such comfort. It reminds us that the most dangerous individuals are often the ones who understand us best, who study us, who adapt, who blend. Daniel Harlow did not break into lives, he was invited into them. And that is why this story does not end with justice. It ends with awareness, because somewhere, right now, someone is trusting a familiar face, defending someone they love, explaining away a feeling they cannot name. And maybe they are right, but maybe, just maybe, they are not. This story is not a story about suspicion. It is a story about vigilance, about listening when something feels wrong, even when the person in front of you feels right. Because evil does not always arrive screaming. Sometimes it arrives quietly and waits for permission.